remember preaching that sermon. At that moment, I knew that I wouldn't retire from GM. I'm in school, I'm working, I'm involved at church, I'm superintendent of the Sunday school, I'm a deacon, very close to my pastor, Pastor Rufus Bradley, Sr. Nah, I really didn't really know how God was going to do it, but I knew I would pastor one day. So now continually going to school, continually doing the things that I was supposed to do in ministry at New Life, making that ministry grow. I knew one thing for sure, that my responsibility was to make that ministry grow. So even though I knew I was going to pastor, I never focused on that. I focused on growing the ministry at New Life. And then it happened, individuals start sharing that churches were looking for pastors. And I know for a fact in my mind that I'm going to pastor in Saginaw, I'm going to pastor in Flint. It just made sense because that's where I am, that's where I was trained. It just made sense. So even though I candidated in Toledo, really that didn't really go that well because I never felt that. But then I'm looking in Flint and churches asking me to candidate. And I remember one church, Canaan Baptist, they were looking for a pastor. That church was looking for a pastor. And I actually thought that was it. I'm chummy with the chairman of the deacons. And he had almost guaranteed me, like, you're the next pastor. So, of course, I know I got it. And so I go back and my best friend at that time, Reverend Charles Roots, I then share with Pastor Roots. I said, Reverend Roots, Canaan is looking for a pastor. Why don't you put in your resume? Now, I never expected him to get it, but I'm sure with my friend, put in your resume. He actually put in his resume. And at the time he put in his resume, then the two finalists as far as candidates were Roots and myself. Now, here's the thing that really just floored me. The church voted. And when they voted, they didn't choose me. They chose my best friend. They chose Roots. Now, I got to tell you, they called me and they said, Reverend Moore, we got to let you know we selected a pastor. So the next words I'm waiting for is, you the one. And they said, we chose Pastor Reverend Roots. I was like, oh my goodness. Got to be honest with you, for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I'm like shaking. I'm like, first of all, I'm mad at Roots. I'm mad at God. I'm mad at Canaan. And then the Holy Spirit really reminded me. Acts 20:28, it says that, take heed to yourselves and the flock which the Holy Spirit made you overseer. So I had to come to myself and realize that if Roots was the pastor, he didn't choose himself. The church didn't choose him, but God did it. So if I'm going to be angry with anybody, it had to be God. So then, of course, I can't be angry with God. So now I got to accept the fact that my best friend got the church that I knew I had. And here's the crazy thing. Since he's my best friend, at his installation, guess who has to speak? And so I'm speaking at his installation. By then, I'm over it, of course, because I can't be mad because God is doing it. And so I began to just go back now and do what I was doing, go back to work at GM, going back to New Life, doing the ministry, making the ministry grow, working in that ministry. Little did I realize that God was doing a work. And I didn't realize it at that time, but God was working on me, and he was working on Mount Zion at the same time. Of course, I didn't know what he was doing here, but I knew what he was doing with me. At that point in time, I had I like to say, a forgiveness issue. There was a boss I had that, I don't want to say I hated him, but I strongly disliked him. And so obviously, I didn't know it, but God had to work that out of me. And so during that year, I remember going in and talking to my boss and said, look, I forgive you. Of course, he was shocked. He didn't know what I was talking about, but I knew what I was talking about. So I forgave him, and that time God kept working on me. And then a year to the date that Canaan called the pastor, a year to that date, I get a call from Mount Zion in Kalamazoo. Now, the reason I sent a resume to Mount Zion in Kalamazoo is because I'm going to school. I'm at United Theological Seminary. They had an extension course in Flint. I'm going to school. I know the president of the school, Dr. Granville Smith. And so I had interviewed at a church in Flint, Mount Nebo. It was, they were looking for a pastor, and I remember going there that Sunday, and it was about 8, 10, maybe 15 people in the service. They had no musicians, so Chris played the piano, Mike played the drums, and so we were there, and I preached, and they appeared as though they wanted me. So I go back to New Life and tell Pastor Bradley. He said, you don't want that church. I said, I don't? He said, no, God has something better for you. So of course I'm fine, because I'm respectful to my pastor, and I really knows he has my best interest in at heart. So if he says that's not the place for me, then guess what? That's not the place for me. So I forgot about that. So going to school, I told Dr. Granville Smith, I said, I interviewed at this church, and Dr. Smith, I want to pastor full time. And I don't think this church is looking for a full-time pastor. He said, well, I'll tell you what, there's this church in Kalamazoo that I know, that I've got a friend from Washington. He just candidated there, and they had invited him to come, and he's not going. Send your resume there. Now, of course, that doesn't make sense to me, because I'm going to pastor in Flint. I'm going to pastor in Saginaw, one of those cities. So this doesn't make sense that send the resume to Mount Zion in Kalamazoo. Of course, I'm driving home from Flint from school. Now I hear God talking. God says to me on the ride home, he says, you said that you were going to go where I told you to go. You said that you were going to say what you told me to, that I told you to say. So I'm wrestling with God on my way home. This 35-mile drive from Flint to Saginaw. I'm wrestling with God. By the time I get home, of course, you know who won. God did. So I go down to our basement, and I fill out my paperwork, I get a resume, I put it in the mail. Next morning, I tell God, now, there, leave me alone. So I forgot about it. So about a month later, I get a call from Deacon Carl Wilson, Mount Zion. This is Deacon Wilson from Mount Zion. Now here it is. Now I'm cool with this. I'm cool because I'm like, I actually forgot that I had sent a resume to Mount Zion, Kalamazoo. I actually forgot. And so now I'm like, Mount Zion, Kalamazoo. Yeah, right. Okay, yeah. Mount Zion, Kalamazoo. You sent a resume. I said, yeah. He said, well, we'd like for you to come down for an interview. Now, you got to know this. Here I am. I've got like nothing on my calendar. So I tell Deacon Wilson, now, he doesn't even know this. I said, just a moment, let me check my schedule. I look at my schedule with nothing in it. And he says, he gave me a date. I said, I'm sorry, I can't come that date. I'm busy. And so then what he did, he gave me another date. He said, what about this date, December 18th? I said, let me check. I actually checked, and I'm like, okay, I think I can make that date. I'll move some things around. I can make it. I had nothing on my calendar. So then I come down for the interview. And here I am. I interviewed on Saturday with the deacons, trustees, and church committee. Preached on Sunday. And then after the service, the church interviews me. The vote is taken on Tuesday. Tuesday night at 9 o'clock, I get a call. Hello, Reverend Moore. Pastor Moore, you are our new pastor. That's how I got to Mount Zion. So now here's another piece that you gotta know. Now this time we had just renovated our house, and so we're set for living. House is going to be paid for in 7 years. Kids in school, they can walk to school. Everything is convenient. Wife has a job. I got a job on fast track of GM. I'm great at the church. And so now we got to move. And so I share it First Lady Gwendolyn Moore. Well, we got to move to Kalamazoo. Her first thought was, okay, what about this house? Now, we had just renovated an entire house. We just put $40,000 worth of renovations. The house was pristine. It was ready. And now I tell her we got to move. What about this house? So, of course, you know me, I'm flippant with God. I'm like, God got one house, he got another. And so, of course, she made me live up to that promise. But then we moved. And here it is. And this is how I know God works. Because we never put a for sale sign in our yard. Word got around that we were moving to Kalamazoo. People started asking, could they buy our house? We had about 12 people on our list, starting with the first one that asked, and we started putting them on the list. The first person that asked to buy a house bought it for the asking price. No negotiations, no nothing. Sold with no problem. Moved here, my wife gets a job. And then, my sister Patsy, someone was playing a joke on her. She was working for the city of Saginaw. So they saw an article in the paper where they're looking for an accountant in the city of Kalamazoo. They put it on her desk out of jest. She looked at it and applied. She got called to Kalamazoo, the city of Kalamazoo. So God is just setting things in place. And so, as I reflect, 27 years later, here I am at Mount Zion, simply because of what God did. And I realize now that God had prepared a church, a congregation, a city, and he had prepared me to connect with those. And I believe that there's a couple of things I do know 100%. One, I know that I'm saved. Two, I know I'm supposed to be where I am at this time in human history.